I've been getting back into photography during the current situation, and I'm pleased to be making use of some very nice 30-odd-year-old lenses now, so I have a full-frame digital body that I can use them on. And it occurred to me, as I was relearning some things from a while ago and learning to look and compose and what have you, that there's some similarities between some of these fine lenses and microphones, and perhaps photography and singing microphone use generally. So I came to consider the idea of a portrait microphone. This here is a portrait lens, which is an 85mm 1.4, so it's quite a fast lens, as you can see, quite wide. Brings all sorts of complications with the manufacture. It's just compared to a zoom, and you can see that this one's much fatter, lets a lot more light in. I had a look at where the word portrait came from, what it means, and some of the things it came up with were that it is to trace. So if you were to trace, you'd get a very accurate copy of features, and therefore the microphone maybe needs to trace. Draw forth is another explanation. Reveal is another, which I like, to reveal and to expose. I thought then, applying this to a microphone, that I might copy biodynamic in their architects and engineers specification on their older microphones. This is from an M88. I can show you, where is it? Yes, down the bottom there. So let me just bring that up. You can perhaps see down the bottom there their architects and engineers specifications. It reads something like this, the first part of it. The microphone shall be a moving coil dynamic type with a frequency range of 30-20 Hz. The unit shall have, and it goes on like that. So I thought I'm going to copy that with my specifications for a portrait microphone. And here they are, in no particular order, and there might be some missing that I'll think of later, but hey. The microphone shall have a frequency response that easily exceeds the human voice. I think I need that. At a distance of 12 inches, the microphone shall have no accentuation of any frequencies. Why would it? I want to trace what's there, so it's going to be flat. At distances closer than 12 inches, the microphone shall exhibit a gentle and clean proximity effect. You might say, we're going off track here, aren't we, a bit? But from my experience, obviously I've got a lower voice. Doesn't really matter, because you can always cut if you haven't. But the lower frequencies, as we know, the ear is less sensitive. Also, in the voice, you can't be, well, I can't. I haven't found a way of being loud, low down. If you're low down, it's like, I can't make that any louder. I just push more air through and just blow things apart. So, for me, I feel then that if there is some accentuation there, that it's fair enough. It kind of goes with nature, even though, if you like, it's not strictly accurate. Exhibit a gentle and clean proximity effect is what I put, of course. The microphone shall have a wide cardioid polar pattern with a natural off-axis performance. So looking at a fairly wide cardioid with a natural off-axis performance, so it doesn't start sounding completely different. The microphone shall exhibit exceptional time domain performance, free of overhang and artifacts. Again, if you've watched some of my videos, I'm very keen on the speed of that area. It seems to me to be very important in revealing, in making a portrait. Free of overhang and artifacts, some diaphragms, even though they might start very quickly, they might not stop so quickly, and sometimes there are, I think, resonances within the larger diaphragms. I think 1-inch diaphragms, typical ones, are known for that. The microphone shall have excellent sensitivity, so I want to be able to, this is a good microphone, I want to be able to use it. So if you like, it's positioning with your lens. Are you including a lot of the background, or actually do you want to be really quite close in on the person? The microphone shall be resistant to handling noise. The microphone shall be exceptionally quiet electronically. So you don't want to over your portrait, a wash of hiss, hum, sound. Now there's something I've noticed having moved from film, got some left. The convenience then is I can go and put it on the computer, and what I started doing, of course, testing the lenses, seeing how sharp they are, seeing this, that and the other, is I would zoom in. And I started to see some flaws, chromatic aberration and purple fringing they call it, which may be to do with using old school lenses on a digital sensor, who knows, or maybe back in the day. I think things have got better, you know. I thought, oh yeah, we can get rid of it, you have to. But then I thought, wait a minute, I've zoomed in way further than I ever looked at before when I was using film. I mean, I'd scarcely get 10x8s done, usually be 5x7. And you just wouldn't see that. But now, because of the capability, you just zoom in right into the pixels. So again, then I'm thinking with microphones these days, we can zoom in more because headphones, monitoring, playback, generally speaking, is much better than it was. So you're going to hear these things, but also you don't want to be perhaps too ridiculous about it, like with zooming in on the screen. It needs to be a reasonable level of magnification, if you like. Something about the lenses. I've been reading some fascinating books, and sharpness, sometimes it's contrast. So one line of manufacturers, very good, German manufacturers, made lenses, and they're known to be contrasty, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're sharper. So if they do a test with white light and black lines very clearly delineated. So if a lens really brings a very dark black and a very bright white, it appears to pop, appears really sharp. But you look at the edges, it might not be so. Whereas a lens that perhaps where the black is more a kind of a charcoal, and maybe the white isn't so, at first it looks a little softer, but you might find when you look closely that it's actually sharper. So the accentuation, that hyped contrast, it seems to me, is what some microphones do. And woo, 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 which tends to be initially very appealing. What I've noticed with the portrait microphones is, of course, they don't have that. And at first it can be a little bit almost disappointing, but after a while you find it's very natural and you start to hear other things which you didn't hear before, the real detail, because that was masked somewhat, partly because the microphone simply couldn't do it, but also because you've got that shh, shh, and woo, 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 which distracts you immediately. Would you need such a microphone? Though it will work well, equally well, if you don't need it. Let me explain, if I may. Again, referring to photography. I like to take headshots, maybe head and shoulders, so they're quite close because I like all the detail, and I like to be able to blur the background. Yeah, maybe I'm getting a bit boring. Maybe I should try something else. But if I were to take, say, a portrait of somebody in a crowd, say a rock star in a crowd, loads of people, you wouldn't know, unless you knew that person and you knew they were there, you'd think, it's a nice enough photograph, just loads of people, what's that about? If the person who the portrait was of, from a distance and amongst all these people, was wearing bright red and everybody else was wearing black, you'd immediately see who it was. That's the point of the photograph. Or maybe if he was wearing the same clothes but had an outlandish pose and everybody else was just standing, your eye would pick that up. So if you like, I'm calling that accentuation. If I apply that to music in a rock band, I was into Deep Purple a lot and still am, but I noticed that compared to all the Sinatra stuff that I'd been learning and copying, that the rock voice is in there with the music. So if you like, it's like my portrait where the person's in there. Of course, if the singer just blended in entirely with the music, what's the point? So that kind of accentuation, like wearing a red outfit or something, pushes the voice through, and even though it's in the music, you can still hear the voice. So in that sense, you wouldn't need for that type of portrait, you wouldn't need a portrait mic, because any mic almost will do that. In the Sinatra type things I was listening to, even though it's with the big band, which makes quite a din, you notice when you listen to the early Sinatra recordings, the voice is like, you can hear everything about it. It's, in a sense, I was going to say ridiculously loud compared to the band. I mean, if you just had the person singing there acoustically with a big band, you'd scarcely hear them. So, but on the records, woof, the voice is there. So for me then, it's certain types of singing where this portrait microphone would be useful, and certain types of photography where this portrait lens is useful. However, I could use this portrait lens for architecture. So what I'm saying then is that generally though, you could use a portrait lens and a portrait microphone for anything because they have everything and they're expensive. They have everything. But it's going to cost you. And what's the point? You may not need it. I think that's enough. You can see where I'm going with this thinking. I've been using various microphones, no longer for reviewing so much, but for actually using them for myself, for originals I've been writing. And I've come to some practical realizations about using them. So what I'm going to do probably in the next video is I'm going to say which of my mics, bearing in mind this specification, I consider to be portrait mics and why, and the ones, even though I like them, that I don't consider to be portrait microphones.